All right, we're calling this Enlightenment, from the programming of idealisms to the ending of illusions, disillusionment, and beyond. And we'll explore what we mean by the programming of idealisms a little or a lot, maybe. Um, we've got a few introductory visual aids, and we've got a little outline of what we'll be talking about. And Daniel has offered to lead at least a portion of the process. Um, I want to note that we're talking about exploring language and becoming related to language as a tool that can be used relatively effectively or relatively ineffectively, and it's really as simple as that. So I guess we could say we're talking about interpersonal communication, but we're talking about interpersonal communication even as it relates to emotions like disillusionment or to a label like enlightenment, whatever that might mean to someone already. We'll explore what that could mean as a label. So, Daniel, what do you want to say at this point?
Oh, I'm excited. Yeah, the authority of language. I'm ready to get into it.
Okay, well, go ahead.
What do you want me to do?
Well, do you want to start with the five little visual aids and just go over that real quick as a real cool, general, simple, clear frame of reference?
Right. So we basically have non-linguistic and linguistic as two different ends of the spectrum, right? Or there's two different possibilities. And then linguistic, kind of breaks off into unconscious language and conscious language.
And I do want to note that I think of these as spectrums.
Okay.
So it's not like there's unconscious and conscious and nothing in between. There's a little dash in there to give the idea that there's a range, but for simplicity, we can think of it as just two extremes that contrast. Go ahead.
Okay. And then in the unconscious, or I'm sorry, in the conscious language, as we use that, we can explore language and we can experiment with it. As opposed to in the unconscious language, we can break off into categories as innocent, idealism, a critic, reformer, cynic, all different categories that might be unconscious and not as productive as conscious language.
And what we have in mind today, as far as setting up this chart, we're exploring language, including the less conscious or less mindful uses of language, the less attentive uses of language. And I've said elsewhere already to Daniel that I think of these as generally modes of operating in which people are tense or afraid, to be very general. When there is, like if you think of an infant exploring language, they're exploring the basics of language, or if I'm learning a new language, I'm just in the mode of learning and exploring, and I don't know how I don't know how the grammar should be. There's a lot of things that I don't know, and I have no concern with. So I'm just in that mode of exploring what in the Zen tradition is called beginner's mind. We use the term novice here. I just made up that label for later. We'll talk about it more maybe, but as we go through the process of exploring, we get to the point of then having some particular outcome in mind, and we begin experimenting with language. And when I say we begin experimenting, we don't ever stop experimenting. If you're using language and you know it, that means you're experimenting. If you're learning about language, you can call it exploring. If you're trying to do something with language or have fun with language, then you're experimenting. I want to leave it to you to talk as much as you'd like, Daniel. So go ahead.
Well, I mean, as far as what are we talking about? I mean,
what do you want to have? What do you want to say about this chart so far, or the process? I don't know how much you have in mind, since we didn't talk about that much yet.
Let me bring it back up now. I was going back to the list you had sent me earlier. Yeah.
So we have a list that we can share, so people can look at it. If you want to actually just, I don't know that we should take any time to go into detail about what we mean by idealist and critic and all that stuff, but we could run through the list really quick like we did the other day. But I want to really allow us to get into some depth about what this exploration means to you personally and can mean for other people, and why people would be interested in it, that kind of thing, and then uh, kind of build our speed and build some momentum and go from there.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's certainly to stay aware of the language, and whether it's producing results or whether it's kind of keeping you in a perpetual standstill. I think that's what you're basically saying here, and that can be important to be aware of the effect of the language that we use and the emotion behind it, most likely, right? I mean, it's not just about the language we use, be the emotion behind it as well, right?
Say more about what you mean by the emotion behind it.
Well, just like you said, with the innocent, the idealist, the critic, the reformer, the cynic, there's going to be negative connotation, probably more than likely, when we use language in those ways. Now, we can be playful with it, but if we're being serious, it might come off in a negative way and be repulsive, actually, to others. Which is not going to get results, like being conscious of what the language we use, right? I mean.
Well, you say it's not going to get results. Say again, just consider what you said and develop what you mean by that. It's not going to get results. To do what, and how do you mean that?
Well, it's just going to leave us frustrated because we're not using language for a purpose. I mean, we're kind of. Of course, we're using language for a purpose. That doesn't make any sense. But the purpose may not be to produce results at that point. When we're unaware of the language we're using, and we're kind of just speaking out emotionally instead of being mindful, is what I'm saying. That certainly can lead to unconscious language.
Okay, so if we're not being mindful, it can lead to it can then unconscious use of language can arise. What kind of results come from that? I think you were setting up that reference, and you touched on it here and there. Do you want to develop that or move on?
Well, the results are going to lead to frustration, probably,
Okay.
And just
frustration is huge, right?
Right.
And what's the contrasting potential?
Well, the contrasting potential would be, peace, I guess, as being the opposite. Peace in the middle of the storm, is that what we call the group? Or, as opposed to the frustration we feel when we're not completely aware of our language.
Okay, so being aware of our language doesn't mean we won't experience frustration, but if we do experience frustration and we're aware of our language, then what's available?
Other options. Like you said, experimenting with language, we can take other approaches. We can change.
Go ahead.
We can change our approach, right? If we're aware that something is not very beneficial or something is not producing the result we want, then we can experiment and find what does produce the result we want. You're right.
Right. So you have an idea. If we have an idea of the result we want, and language is part of the process that we see as our method for producing that result, then to experiment with language and really to be mindful of what the results of the language are, that's the learning process. That is being alive and learning rather than being alive and being in distress or something else. And there's nothing invalid about distress. It's just a state of relative ineffectiveness, generally speaking, unless the desired result is to attract help from a external authority figure, like a 2-year-old crying for mommy, perfectly adaptive. But in other cases, people may cry for help and be successful, like calling 911 or something, that can be wonderfully adaptive. But in other cases, it's going to take, I'll say a lawsuit. In a lawsuit, or in filling out forms, or coding a coding a page of a website, there's all sorts of experiments that can go on, and they produce slightly different effects or dramatically different effects. What do you say to the police officer when they pull you over, or when you call them, or whatever? Like, what people say can be really important. Sometimes what people say is of very little importance, but sometimes it can be really important. And in our relationships with other people, whether that's job, marriage, friendship, language is important. If we don't speak the same language as somebody, that makes a difference. Go ahead.
When you talk about the unconscious language that we may use, I mean, that could be a metaphorical hell, actually. And that also, you say we're learning when we're experimenting with language. But I tend to think that if we do fall into the critic or the reformer or the cynic, in those moments, if we're sincere about it, it's kind of a perpetual hell.
Yeah.
It can become that,
Well, that's interesting that you say that, Vanessa.
So
you want to
learn. So that's all. There's also learning to be done. It's not just about just experimenting with language. Sometimes the language we use, we can learn from that as well. Eventually.
Yeah, right. And the language other people use, we can see other people in a mode or stage of being a critic or being a victim, or the labels I threw out there are for convenience, not that they're necessarily important. But Vanessa and I were talking about the different modes, like critic, reformer, cynic, and so on, as like the 7 layers of Dante's Inferno, of hell. I don't know how old that book is. Is that like 800 years old?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really old book. And
I'm aware of it, but I don't know anything about it.
I think it was like in Italian, and then got translated into English and other languages.
Translated into like every language.
Yeah, she says it's translated into every language.
A lot
So-
of languages. Fine.
So if you want to know it in Klingon,
Probably, I mean, it can be a geek's book.
it's a geek's book, so it's probably translated into Klingon according to Vanessa. So.
I'm sure somebody's done that then, yeah.
I don't know. It could be. Yeah.
Well, Tolkien fans learn to speak Elf.
Tolkien fans learn to speak Elf.
Elvish.
So if you don't know how to speak Elvish, then according to Vanessa, you obviously are not a Tolkien fan.
I am a Tolkien fan, and I don't speak.
Oh, wait a minute. She made an amendment. So at this point, before we get into the the somewhat dry content, the calm, plain exploration, I did want to also point out the little graphic of the 1+1 signs and people. Daniel, you know the one I'm talking about.
Yes.
Do you want to make some reference to that and how that's what that reminds you of?
Yeah, let me pull if I could. Right. So the one sign is 1+1. The one group of people, 1+1 equals 1, and then the other group are holding signs that say 1+1 equals 3, and then the two is just like kind of sitting in the middle of them as they're fighting, punching each other, knocking each other down. The 2 is kind of just the witness to it all, basically, right? Or just, I don't know.
That's what I see. Yeah.
What is the 2 doing?
It's standing at the bottom, and there's one member of the red team or group, and one member of the blue group are looking angrily at the number 2 person, who is obviously not engaged in this very important controversy.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So what does that remind you of?
Well, we could say that would be
Facebook?
yeah. Or any other aspect of life. I mean, everybody's got a purpose or a cause, and that certainly affects their. They got to fight for it. I mean, you have to defend it. You have to fight for it, even if it's the wrong answer. You'll fight for it.
What do you mean the wrong answer? 1+1. Look at my sign. Can you see what it says? 1+1 equals
1.
7.
Oh.
You people don't know how to do binary. What is this? Is it hexadecimal? It's a base 2.
That's, oh,
It's
two
base
is
10. It's I don't know. I'm making up Fibonacci
So if there is no
references.
black and white answer, it's
Six,
all gray then.
basic.
There is no such thing as
Exercise
an answer. You know, there could be 15,000 answers. You know, is that what you're trying to say?
15,000 answers.
Well, I mean, for different things, there can be different answers. There's not usually just one definable answer for most things.
What is the square root of 9?
3?
No.
Then damn, it's 81.
3 or -3. If you don't say both, then you're
Right.
you're doing it
Right.
wrong.
Oh, right.
Okay.
See, there you go.
Okay,
Right.
There's exactly
answers.
2 answers. There's not
Right.
15,000. There's not 1. There's 2. Now it depends on the question. Some questions there's exactly 1 answer.
Yeah. Sure.
Ask my wife. I tell you, there's some questions there's no right answer. Some questions you just do not. You change the subject. Okay.
Shut up, you
Yeah.
never change the subject.
Yeah.
Like you would
I hear
ever do
that. Hold on one second.
So let's see. What's an example of what were we talking about? Gay rights. We were talking about. So this is not. I mean, anybody who's really into this issue this might not be a great example for them. But when my wife and I were talking last night, we made reference to the idea of gay rights. So people could say, I support gay rights, or I'm strongly opposed to it. And if you have people that have some pet issue, and one set of people congregate around one position very strongly and passionately and sincerely, and another group of people congregate around the same issue but with the opposite, opposing preference, let's say, or answer, then you got square root of 9. One group says it equals 3, and one group says it equals -3 is square root of 9, and they argue and they argue and they argue, and then somebody, occasionally says whatever doesn't fit the whole tension and dilemma that those people are involved in, that either or polarity. Anybody who's outside of that is either like a foreigner who doesn't speak English, who doesn't understand our country and our culture and blah blah. Well, those people are, like a 2-year-old. We just dismiss them in general. They don't know they don't know the importance of this issue, and that's okay. And then there's the idiots who seem to think that they should not spend at least 27 hours I don't know, is it a year? 27 hours a year on the gay rights issue? Is that the appropriate amount to get into heaven, Daniel? Do you know? I don't know if it changed. I
I
thought
think I've heard something like that. Yeah.
27 hours a year. It's like CEUs. So if you don't do that, you need to you need to have those credits. Somebody's counting. You want Christmas prizes from Santa, bribes, by December 25th. Don't wait till the last 6 days of the year. Go ahead and get your 27 hours of advocacy and campaigning on whatever particular pet issue is the most important in the world to you. So
I find that interesting. You know why? Because I think about it and I say to myself, does anybody really care what anybody else is doing in their private time? I think that when we talk about gay rights or something like that, that's programmed. It's programmed in that people are opposed to it. Because who really is sitting around thinking about, well, this is what I do in my free time, but I'm really concerned about what everybody else is doing in their free time. A lot of issues I think are programmed in. Divide and conquer, right? I mean, you program these things in, you divide the people, then they're so distracted with this division that they've been programmed with that they kind of completely miss that they really don't care. You know what I mean? Do you really care? I mean, seriously, do you really care who what people are doing in their private time?
Daniel, do you realize that right now in the state of Colorado there are 79 people who are not smoking marijuana?
What's wrong with them?
I don't know.
They should move it. They can live where I'm at, not let me have their house.
Yeah. You do like a vacation swap, or
yeah, right. I see those TV shows. The wife swap. The pot smoker swap.
Now you're on to something. All right. I don't know why they'd want to come to. Oh, it's springtime where you are. It's nice according to you. So
Yeah, it's not bad.
they can come and mow the grass there, and you can. All right.
Go
So
skiing.
what?
Go skiing.
Let's go. Okay, I was going to say something related to grass, but anyway. Um, so we're jumping into the realm of playfulness here, of course, but. Once we've done some exploration of language, or as we do it, it's one of the things that arises the possibility of just having fun in life. There's a potential shift from tension to and distress to a broader sense of relaxation and ease. And it doesn't mean that I need to have fun all the time, or that other people should have fun any particular amount of time. But um, my reactivity to someone using a sequence of words diminishes. I'm not agreeing with them viciously or intensely. I'm not opposing them passionately. Or I might be, but it'd be less and less often that it happens that I have that reaction of intense tension and less intensity maybe about any particular issue and more of a sense of choice in what is attractive to me and how do I want to pursue it. That's really where the matter of choice is. I'm not saying I have a choice as to what's attractive to me necessarily, but if things are valuable to me, are attractive to me, if I am committed to them, then I can be deliberate and mindful in regard to how I practice or manifest my commitment. And if somebody's like, if they happen to be a practitioner of exclusive homosexuality, and they happen to have a particular monogamous partner, and they want to advance their rights in that matter, I happen to think that that's completely understandable, and for that person, it makes sense to me that they might invest 27 hours a year, or whatever amount of time. I mean, it's really like I don't like kind of like Daniel was implying there. I don't really care how much time or how much energy people put into any particular issue, except for are they supporting the issues that I care about. But that's everybody's perspective. And if I can say, well, I know that other people are going to have their pet issues and they're going to want me to join their bandwagon, then that I don't know, to somehow for me that sets up a context of ease. Like I know what I'm committed to. I know that other people may have different momentum or different focus, and it's just not an issue. It's a fact. Other people currently may have a different focus or different momentum. If they do, then I can either talk to them about joining my bandwagon or not. Like it's there's no issue with everybody needs to agree with me, or everybody in my office needs to agree with me, or everybody in my neighborhood needs to agree with me. Well, everybody does not need to agree with me. At least about the vast majority of subjects. If I'm there might be an issue where people have an intense. I think of things like well, the Bundy Ranch episode in Nevada. So you know what I'm talking about generally, right, Daniel?
Generally, yes.
Okay. I don't know a lot about it, but if there is a case that it's so disturbing to it's disruptive to, what do they call that? Disturbing the peace. If it's disruptive to the community for there to be a standoff and there's like 200 law enforcement agents and 1,000 civilians and they're doing a parade or a protest or whatever, there's certain things that a riot, for instance. Let's go away from the Bundy Ranch incident or issue in particular and say a riot. Well, pretty much everybody in my neighborhood would probably agree that we don't like the idea of a riot. Like we don't like a forest fire or a flood sweeping through our neighborhood. We pretty much would prefer no flood. Let's build some, really big dams or walls or whatever. or move away or whatever. Levees is the word I was looking for in New Orleans. There are things that are practical issues or could be practical issues. Everybody in my neighborhood may be really committed to having the electricity working. So if there's no electricity and it's, May in Phoenix, Arizona or Mesa, all of a sudden people get really motivated to, let's get the electrical company out here to our neighborhood and get that handled. So, we have these 8 little distinctions or modes. Do you want to go ahead into at least a superficial review of what is in that, Daniel?
Yep.
Or do you want to say anything about what I just said first?
I'm pulling it up now. We're talking about what you sent me yesterday?
Yeah, it begins with ignorant, then innocent, and then all the way goes down to novice and pragmatist, and there's...
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Ah.
I can send it to you real quick if you need me to. Here.
That's,
I just popped it into, I don't know if it's sent. Huh. Did you find
is
it?
it in there?
I tried to send it through Skype and it actually didn't work. Let me try something else. I'm still sending it through Skype, but I did something wrong. Pardon me for a moment. No, it looks like that just simply isn't working.
Okay, so we're talking about enlightenment and the ending of illusions or disillusionment. So the different ends of the spectrum, right? Again, but ignorant, like totally uninformed, even unable to use language. I guess we'd be talking about an infant or a foreigner or someone like that, right?
Yep.
That's what it's described, right? And then we have innocent.
And just to point out, if we think about these as developmental stages, that's useful. But we can also think if we're completely like intoxicated or sleeping or something like that, we're not obviously in the alert, awake mode to consciously use language. So ignorant is simply a label for convenience. It's not important in and of itself. Go ahead.
Okay, and then we go next to innocent, the next stage, which would be able to use language but without little or no filter for accuracy or logic. So we're talking about the unconscious use of language, right? At that point, and then moving on from innocent would be idealist, the sincere and blindly presumptive of consensus, unaware of any controversy. Idealist. How can they be unaware of controversy if they're the ones stirring the controversy up?
Well, I'm referring to idealist here as separate from the critic, the cynic, the reformer. So we could think of idealist as, you could say like the early stage idealist, if you wish. So at the point, so think about this like a child. So the ignorant child at age 6 months is just practicing sounds. They're not using language, they're using sounds. But they're not really using language. And then at age 3, they're using language. But if somebody says to them, Santa Claus loves you because you have a red shirt on, they just think, oh, I should wear red more often then. Or something like that,
Yeah.
Or Santa Claus loves it when you wear a red shirt. And that's why I like to spill spaghetti sauce on it, Mom, because remember, Santa Claus loves red. Now it's red, see? Why aren't you clapping for me? This is a big, my shirt was white before, and now it's got all this tomato sauce on it. Aren't you glad for me? All right. So
they're very innocent and playful and.
They may not be playful. I mean, literally, they do not have discernment.
Yeah.
So the idealist, or the initial stage of idealist, is someone who is unaware that there's any controversy as to whether or not the Earth is flat, or rotates around the sun, or revolves around the sun, or how old is the solar system, Daniel?
No idea.
Okay, so you might think there's just no controversy. It's millions of years old. It's been like it is now for millions of years. That's generally the consensus that people learn. Is there such a thing as scurvy, Daniel?
Doesn't seem so.
Well, outside of a outside of a label in language, is there a substance, a living thing that we can classify as scurvy? Apparently
No.
not. But people could use that term and think, well, people use the term scurvy, so there must be such a thing as scurvy. I have a book about unicorns, therefore they must there what do you mean there's no unicorns? I've got a book about unicorns.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no filter for fantasy versus scientific credibility versus things that I've directly observed and tested. And oh, that's just a name for a certain kind of equestrian beast, equine beast. Is that the right word? Equine beast, a horse-like critter. So unicorn, is that the name of a high school sports team? Oh, those are the real unicorns. Oh, now I get it. Or in another case, there's a book or a movie or whatever, a cartoon about unicorns. But someone may not be aware of any controversy. Is there such a thing as Bigfoot? Is there such a thing as the devil as an individual living entity? Or scurvy? Is there a living entity called scurvy that spreads and that kind of thing? Somebody who just uses language. Okay, somebody who just uses language mechanically in that early stage, they're just copying other people's usage. They're not necessarily aware of any controversy of any issue. What do you mean there's a controversy about gay rights? Of course gays should have the following rights and not those rights but these rights. Of course. Whatever their position. Episode in Nevada. So you know what I'm talking about generally, right, Daniel?
Generally, yes.
Okay. I don't know a lot about it, but if there is a case that it's so disturbing to it's disruptive to, what do they call that? Disturbing the peace. If it's disruptive to the community for there to be a standoff and there's like 200 law enforcement agents and 1,000 civilians and they're doing a parade or a protest or whatever, there's certain things that a riot, for instance. Let's go away from the Bunny Ranch incident or issue in particular and say a riot. Well, pretty much everybody in my neighborhood would probably agree that we don't like the idea of a riot. Like, we don't like a forest fire or a flood sweeping through our neighborhood. We pretty much would prefer no flood. Let's build some, really big dams or walls or whatever, or move away or whatever. Levees is the word I was looking for in New Orleans. There are things that are practical issues or could be practical issues. Everybody in my neighborhood may be really committed to having the electricity working. So if there's no electricity and it's, May in Phoenix, Arizona or Mesa, all of a sudden people get really motivated to, let's get the electrical company out here to our neighborhood and get that handled. So, we have these 8 little distinctions or modes. Do you want to go ahead into at least a superficial review of what is in that, Daniel?
Yep.
Or do you want to say anything about what I just said first?
I'm pulling it up now. We're talking about what you sent me yesterday?
Yeah, it begins with ignorant, then innocent, and then all the way goes down to novice and pragmatist, and there's...
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Ah.
I can send it to you real quick if you need me to. Here.
That's,
I just popped it into, I don't know if it's sent. Huh. Did you find
is
it?
it in there?
I tried to send it through Skype and it actually didn't work. Let me try something else. I'm still sending it through Skype, but I did something wrong. Pardon me for a moment. No, it looks like that just simply isn't working.
Okay, so we're talking about enlightenment and the ending of illusions or disillusionment. So the different ends of the spectrum, right? Again, but ignorant, like totally uninformed, even unable to use language. I guess we'd be talking about an infant or a foreigner or something like that, right?
Yep.
That's what it's described, right? And then we have innocent.
And just to point out, if we think about these as developmental stages, that's useful. But we can also think if we're completely like intoxicated or sleeping or something like that, we're not obviously in the alert, awake mode to consciously use language. So ignorant is simply a label for convenience. It's not important in and of itself. Go ahead.
Okay. And then we go next to innocent, the next stage, which would be able to use language but without little or no filter for accuracy or logic. So we're talking about the unconscious use of language, right? At that point. And then moving on from innocent would be idealist, the sincere and blindly presumptive of consensus, unaware of any controversy. Idealist. How can they be unaware of controversy if they're the ones stirring the controversy up?
Well, I'm referring to idealist here as separate from the critic, the cynic, the reformer. So we could think of idealist as, you could say like the early stage idealist, if you wish. So at the point, so think about this like a child. So the ignorant child at age 6 months is just practicing sounds. They're not using language, they're using sounds. But they're not really using language. And then at age 3, they're using language. But if somebody says to them, Santa Claus loves you because you have a red shirt on, they just think, oh, I should wear red more often then. Or something like that,
Yeah.
Or Santa Claus loves it when you wear a red shirt. And that's why I like to spill spaghetti sauce on it, Mom, because remember, Santa Claus loves red. Now it's red, see? Why aren't you clapping for me? This is a big, my shirt was white before, and now it's got all this tomato sauce on it. Aren't you glad for me? All right.
So they're very innocent and playful and.
They may not be playful. I mean, literally, they do not have discernment.
Yeah.
So the idealist, or the initial stage of idealist, is someone who is unaware that there's any controversy as to whether or not the Earth is flat, or rotates around the sun, or revolves around the sun, or how old is the solar system, Daniel?
No idea.
Okay, so you might think there's just no controversy. It's millions of years old. It's been like it is now for millions of years. That's generally the consensus that people learn. Is there such a thing as scurvy, Daniel?
It doesn't seem so.
Well, outside of a label in language, is there a substance, a living thing that we can classify as scurvy? Apparently not, but people could use that term and think, well, people use the term scurvy, so there must be such a thing as scurvy. I have a book about unicorns, therefore what do you mean there's no unicorns? I've got a book about unicorns. So there's no filter for fantasy versus scientific credibility versus things that I've directly observed and tested, and that's just a name for a certain kind of equestrian beast, equine beast, is that the right word? Equine beast, a horse-like critter. So unicorn, is that the name of a high school sports team? Oh, those are the real unicorns. Oh, now I get it. Or in another case, there's a book or a movie or whatever, a cartoon about unicorns. But someone may not be aware of any controversy. Is there such a thing as Bigfoot? Is there such a thing as the devil as an individual living entity? Or scurvy? Is there a living entity called scurvy that spreads and that kind of thing? Somebody who just uses language mechanically in that early stage, they're just copying other people's usage. They're not necessarily aware of any controversy of any issue. What do you mean there's a controversy about gay rights? Of course gays should have the following rights and not those rights, but these rights. Of course, whatever their position is on gay rights, if they've only been exposed to one perspective, then that is unaware of any controversy, and they're a absolutely, totally naive idealist.
What were they, like, born in a cave or blast from the past, like nuclear? What was that called? A nuclear, the bunkers that were built back in the '60s. I mean, how could you not be aware of controversy? I mean, how you're aware of the controversy, right? I mean, even as an idealist, you would be aware. You wouldn't be speaking out if you weren't aware of the controversy. Why would you speak out then?
You wouldn't speak out at that stage of idealism. We're getting in depth. So we could, back to the other chart. Let me jump back to one of those first things we brought up was that chart of unconscious language. So there's, the idealist, the critic, all these different things. You could call all of that the realm of idealism. So I talked about the programming of ideals. Daniel was making reference to divide and conquer as it relates to maybe a political issue like gay rights, but whatever the issue might be, divide and conquer could be a pattern that we could observe in the media or in some individual's commentary. But within the realm of unconscious language, there's idealism throughout it. I'm talking about the first stage of idealist as like the 3-year-old has no filter for accuracy and logic and discernment. They're completely innocent. At 5, they're aware that there is such a thing as controversy. There's such a thing as deception. I mean, a 3-year-old knows that, I assume, as well. But in a particular case, the earth is flat or the earth is round or whatever isn't a controversy to them. In a particular case, they're not aware of any controversy. I don't mean they are unaware of controversy in general. I mean in regard to a particular idealism, they're unaware of any controversy. They've only been exposed to one pretty consistent way of looking at things, and they don't know that there's Celsius and Fahrenheit. They just know Fahrenheit. And it's not that Celsius and Fahrenheit are in any controversy, but my point with that early stage of idealism is there's been so little exposure to a diversity of language patterns and perspectives. There's no potential for conflict at that very early, super optimistic stage. It's still, you could even say that's still, they're transitioning from innocent toward the inevitable arising of the critic. But there is an in-between stage that I just wanted to acknowledge as blindly presumptive. They haven't encountered any evidence contrary to their presumption, and they're not aware of any controversy, so they don't have a strong position. Go ahead.
So could we say that's more of a zero-dimensional look where they can see the two, the opposing contrast at both ends, but they can't see all the different degrees at that point? Is that what we're saying?
I understand what you're talking about.
That's nothing to do with
Well, you can go into that issue right now. You're talking about an either-or exclusive polarity, or that's what I call an either-or polarity.
Wouldn't that be in the idealist group, or no?
Well, let's take this case. Say that you ask a 5-year-old about day or night. Is it day or is it night? And they'll say, "Look, it's either day or it's night. It can't. There's no other option." So they would be sincere. You could say they were innocent. You could say they were an idealist. I don't care which of these labels we pick up. But if we say to them, "Well, have you heard about dusk? Have you heard about sunset as a time of day?" They might say, yeah. Okay, so could we divide the day into 4 sections instead of 2, just either day or night? It could be night, morning, afternoon, right, whatever the divisions are, if it's 5, if it's 3, if it's 8, they start to have a little bit more precision. So then they're aware of a potential, not for controversy per se, but that someone could use two different labels to refer to the same thing. So I could say dusk, and you could say sunset, and we might mean almost exactly the same thing. It's like we use a different accent. I say dusk, and you say dusk. And we mean the same thing, but with a different accent. Well, dusk and sunset, to me, are virtually identical. If somebody else thinks that dusk is a broader term or sunset's a more specific term or any of those things, okay. But to me, there's no controversy between dusk and sunset. But if I say dusk and evening, well, those aren't perfect matches. Evening is a broader category than dusk, in my use of the word. So the idealist at the totally early stage doesn't know of any potential conflict or controversy because they're not related to language as these fluid categories. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
makes sense.
So they're going to be shocked if someone says, no, that's not dusk, it's evening. They'll be surprised. They're not going to be in the mode yet of defending the ideal. They actually aren't present to idealism as such. That stage of idealist, what I'm calling an idealist, they don't actually have any sense of an ideal. It's just the way it is. For them, the way it is whatever their presumption is that they learn from the TV or their grandpa or their little sister or their big sister or whatever, right? Santa Claus likes red shirts. I heard it from my sister. What do you mean you heard he likes green shirts? No. Or whatever. At that point, once they start arguing, then you're getting into a different mode. But maybe he likes both red and green. I don't know. But there's this innocent thing, and then it phases into a degree of idealism, and then it starts to get really interesting. Are you ready to move on, or you want to say more about this stage?
Yep, absolutely. So it gets interesting because the next stage after idealist is critic. Sincere and argumentative, disappointed. Then terrified of the possibility of new learning. So outraged at perceived infidels. Or somebody who, is going to speak against what they're lobbying for. So yeah, that would be the next stage. So then at that point, you're clearly aware of controversy and you're speaking to it, right? You're speaking to it and stirring it up at that point, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
So what comes to mind for you as far as an example here, something in your own life that you've witnessed or something that you've done? Anything?
Well, I think I play a critic quite a bit, actually. I've gotten stuck in that persona quite a bit. I play, much of what I would even post on Facebook would be critic. Would be a critic.
Okay.
Usually, a few times a week anyway.
What would be an example of an issue that would spark a critic for you or for someone else?
Well, typically for me, it would be, something government related. As I guess I've kind of been programmed to be not trusting of the government, which, it's true that they're not really concerned about us, but when things come out and I can see that it's just bullshit or just a distraction technique, I might speak out about that. I might say, well, clearly this is bullshit. They're just trying to distract you from something else that might be relevant, So, that might be a point in time where I take the position of a critic when I can see that, a lot of times when something significant is going on, that's not what they're reporting on the news. That's not what the media is covering. That's not what the government is releasing. I don't know. So that would be one instance where I would become a critic.
Okay. So you're criticizing the government in that case.
Right.
Okay.
Which is pretty absurd, right?
Well, no, I just wanted to be clear. So you mean, go ahead.
But right, it's absurd because the government, that's part of what they do, and that's part of what makes it work, really. Actually, so it's.
What is part of what they do?
Smoke and mirrors, deception,
Oh,
distraction, all that stuff,
Okay, so let's say that we observe some pattern that we label as that's the government. So who is it? It's the government. And what are they doing? They're being deceptive. Okay, so the government's being deceptive. How does a critic relate to that observation or that interpretation? What do they do in the face of that observation? In your own case or in the case of other critics that you've witnessed?
Well, I think they would just speak to, the other end, call attention to the technique that's being used. However they do that using language, they would critique the modus operandi or whatever of the government or even the media, the way they report it. They would critique, how they do things, even though they realize that it doesn't change what's being done. It just, it's a mode you can get caught in, though, is what I'm saying. It's a persona or whatever that you get caught in, right? I mean, it's a stage, like you said.
Okay, so
we're trying to
go ahead.
change the government, or not reforming at that point, but we have ideas of how the government can be more effective for us. But we're not, but which in itself is pretty, diluted, actually. But right, that's what a critic is basically doing, is getting stuck in delusion because they're fighting for things that are going to leave them disappointed. I guess that's what you put down there, sincere and argumentative.
Well, that's what I want to get into when you say fighting, is how are they fighting? The critic can be somebody who talks to themselves in their head, in private, oh, look, that's the government deceiving, and they shouldn't be doing that. That's, of course, a key element of being a critic is this, well, one sense of the word critic and how I'm using it here is the critic isn't just saying that movie sucked, but that movie sucked and here's what they should have done. It's not just a food critic or a movie critic, but it's like I'm now, we watched this cooking show or a couple different cooking shows that have competitions in them, and the food critic or the judge will say, here's your grade and here's what you should do better next round. Or American Idol, when they have the judge for the vocalists or the musicians. So the critic who is literally just saying, well, here's my opinion and here's what I recommend, that's actually not what I mean by the critic here. The critic in the sense of someone complaining about the government. So I haven't used the word complaining yet, but in this audio thing. But if they're complaining about the performer, the critic, the government, that judge on American Idol is a blah, 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 and it's a complaint, right? Any of those kind of communications are what I'm calling the critic. And the emotion that goes with the government is deceiving us and they shouldn't be. What emotions go with that?
Anger.
Outrage, anger.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and what else?
Disappointment would be the result, because again, at that point you're using language unconsciously. You're not really using it consciously or in an effective manner. So disappointment certainly would play in that. But I guess
well, say more about that. I didn't really get that. So I say the government is deceiving us and they shouldn't be. How is disappointment related to that expression, if I'm sincere?
In complaining in that way, and maybe even doing it repeatedly, it's affecting or changing nothing. So at that point, I mean, you're going to continue. If your stance is the government is deceptive, well, then you're just going to be pissed off your whole life, because that's the way it is. I mean, they can be that way. They're powerful. They can be that way if they want to be. But if your stance is going to be, well, I need to speak out about that, well, then you're always going to lose peace in the middle of the storm, or you're not going to have in the storm. You're just never going to get to that, because there's always going to be something you can be speaking out about, right? I mean,
yeah,
that's going to lead to disappointment.
You're reminding me of the word distress that we brought up earlier on. Actually, disappointment is one element, but even more so, more clear in how you were talking, is there's that contrast to just peace, right? And relaxation. There's an immediate experience of distress. The government is deceptive, and the distress would be, and I'm afraid. I do not like that. I'm concerned, I'm afraid, I'm in distress, and in fact, I am outraged. They did it again. Oh, this time, and the critic eventually, in many cases, will find some particular trigger that really becomes a point of focus. You could even say obsession.
Disease.
Dis-ease, absolutely.
Yeah. Yes.
And when we refer to that, I love to pick this thing about scurvy. The critic says, what about mainstream medicine? What is somebody who's a critic? What do they say?
You're going back to the scurvy thing?
Well,